नेपाल भन्छु किनकि म गोर्खामा हुर्केको जन्मेको हो आम पिपल गाउँमा अनि मेरो आमा बुवा पहिला युएमएनमा काम गर्नुहुन्थ्यो त्यसकारण मेरो त्यहाँबाट चाहिँ मेरो यो विषयमा चाहिँ इन्ट्रेस्ट लागेको हो जस्तो लाग्छ किनकि मेरो बुवा एजुकेसन फिल्डमा काम गर्नुहुन्थ्यो त्यो बेला अनि हाम्रो घरमा त्यहाँको गाउँको टिचरहरू आउनुहुन्थ्यो मेरो बुवासँग भेट्नुहुन्थ्यो र त्यहाँ त्यो इम्प्रेसन चाहिँ मलाई चाहिँ एकदम गर्यो होला मेरो विचारमा किनकि म पछि आफै टिचर भएँ नर्वेमा टिचर एजुकेसन गरेँ अनि नर्वेमा पढाएँ पनि धेरै वर्षसम्म लाइक इन प्राइमेरी सेकेन्डरी स्कुल्समा अनि त्यसपछि म फेरि मेरो श्रीमानसँग यता नेपालमा चाहिँ त्यस्तै 12 वर्षसम्म चाहिँ काम गरेँ तर मेरो आज यहाँ आउन चाहिँ एउटा कारण छ कि किनभने म मार्टिन होफ्टुनसँग हुर्केको हो नेपालमा हामी सँगै पढेको कुकुन्डोलमा किनकि म चाहिँ नेपाली स्कुलमा पढेको होइन खास म नर्वेजियन स्कुलमा पढेको हो हाम्रो नर्वेजियन स्कुल थियो नेपालमा त्यो बेला अहिले छैन तर हामी त्यो बेला चाहिँ सँगै पढेको हो अनि मार्टिन चाहिँ हि वाज एज अ यङ पर्सन चाहिँ एकदम ट्यालेन्टेड हुनुहुन्थ्यो र हामीलाई सबैलाई गाइड गर्नुहुन्थ्यो होइन उहाँको हात खुट्टा चलेन तर हि वाज एकदम हाम्रै ग्रुपमा चाहिँ लिडर हुनुहुन्थ्यो के अनि हि वाज एकदम रमाइलो मान्छे हो अनि आइ एम भेरी अनर्ड टु बी हियर भन्नुपर्छ किनकि मेरो अब मैले एकचोटि यहाँ आएँ होइन अर्को ठाउँमा मार्टिनको बुवासँग एकचोटि आएँ तर त्यसपछि आउनु पाएको छैन ल अब यो कुरा छोडौँ अनि यो विषयमा जानुपर्छ किनभने हाम्रो अलि छोटो टाइम छ र हामी आज अन्त ठाउँमा पनि जानुपर्छ अनि के गर्दा होला अलिक इङ्ग्लिसमा भन्न मिल्छ होइन किनकि माई कलिग फ्रम नर्वे वी आर हियर टुगेदर and the reason why we are together in Nepal at this moment is because we have while I was doing my research it was in Agder University that I have done my PhD in Norway, which is in the south of Norway. We started discussing these issues and the outcome of the research, and we had a lot of discussions on what it meant and these kind of things that I will be talking a little bit about. And I think it would be a good idea that I can go through some of the findings and how I have done my research, and then a little shorter so that we can look at how this research might be have implications beyond just this small research that I've done, to see how that can have implications beyond that. And that's when I would like also to Hans to be saying a little bit about how he has perceived this, the findings, and how we have discussed these findings in a different context, and how these might also, maybe after a while, you would join the discussion on how you would view these findings. So, just as a very short introduction, I'll say a little bit about how I've been working and of the intention of a study like that. As I was saying, from my own background, I think that my impression of teachers as a child, from my village experience of my father working in the UMN and the government schools, I think that my impression of teachers in Nepal were that they had played a very important role in the villages, as you all know. And I think I was worried after, over the years, that this kind of, let's say, pride in being a teacher and the role that they played in the villages have diminished in some ways by the influence from outside.
Do you want me to show the pictures of you?
Sure.
Yeah?
Just go ahead. This was just to, you can just go forward there. This is me in Ampipolgon, when we were small and were living in Nepal. Mm-hmm. And we used to live in quite a remote area, as you all know. Yeah. So you can just go on to the next picture. So there is, I think that I felt the need to do something about this understanding of teaching and how teachers understand teaching and their role as teachers, because I think in many ways that the context and how teachers perceive their role as teachers and their work often in reform processes and those kind of when you're introducing new ideas into the education system, there's often an ignorance or undermining of context, the impact of context. And that was my initial interest to find out. So what I've done, just to move on a little bit quickly because of the time, is that I've interviewed only 12 teachers. Now, of course, I have interviewed hundreds of teachers during my years of education, and you know, working out in mostly Kavre area, also been in Palpa for a while, and in different, I was working in Mahendra Bhawan Girls' School for many years, just as a teacher. And I think that my impression was how often a lot of the things were unspoken. You know, they were not on an issue in educational programs of how they felt and their experiences of education and teaching. And that was not a part of many of the programs that we were, you know, were a part of. So I felt the need to talk to teachers. And what I've done is that the whole thesis is based on, initially, on the data that I got from the teachers. And my intention initially was to understand or explore or show how teachers understand their teaching and role as teachers, especially what their belief is in teaching. I was thinking, I need to understand their belief and how they would argue for that belief. That was my intention. And so I interviewed teachers in Nepali. I didn't have a translator. I went out to different places. And of course, as you can understand, it's only 12 teachers, and that is because it was a long process. They are long interviews. They're what I call life histories, or portrayals of teachers, from childhood up until now. So mostly the interviews would last maybe 2 hours, you know, just without interruption. They will tell about म बाल्यकालमा चाहिँ यस्तो स्कुलमा पढेँ, यो गाउँमा हुर्केको, मेरो अनुभव यो हो भनेर त्यहाँबाट चाहिँ up until now they would tell about their life stories. And the reason why I'm saying that is because this was not an interview in that you know, common sense. It was not a structured interview. I didn't have many questions. I would say, tell me about your childhood. How did you come into teaching, and how do you experience teaching now? And then I would leave it open, and the data that I have got is based on what their life stories, long life stories. Okay. And so the reason why that was important to me was that I was trying not to guide or interrupt the story or what that person wanted me to know. Okay, so I would usually also tell about my own experiences, about myself, and because people could speak in their own bhasa. And of course, one issue that comes up is that people, as we know, would like, what is it that I want to know? I know. And they will maybe want to tell you something that you are looking for. I know. And so it was a challenge for me to try to, as honestly, and what they would like to tell me about. I know. So that was an issue that comes up because you अब विदेशी भनेपछि त हैन यो खोजेको छ कि अथवा यो भन्नुपर्छ कि भन्ने कुराहरु छिटो आउँछ नि हैन. So how to not have that too, you know, guided, because there is that, you know, importance of feeling that you could be open, I know. And maybe one good thing is that अब बोल्न सक्छ बुझ्न सक्छ हैन मैले, तर I'm not connected to any jat and anybody's families or anything. म बाहिरबाट आएको मान्छेलाई चाहिँ share गर्न सकिन्छ कि जस्तो लाग्यो मलाई. But you can check my data because 7 of the interviews are actually in the thesis. So how authentic they are or not, people can judge for themselves. But these stories are now given in my research thesis, and I think most comments are that they are very authentic, and I think people will feel that they are quite something that you would recognize and feel that this is quite honestly told. So I think that is important to say in that sense.
Yeah, maybe I can give you just a comment on that, because that's where I met Helen first time. I didn't know what the, well, can I give a brief introduction to myself?
Yeah.
I have to, because it has to be put in context.
Yeah.
I'm sorry about that, but my name is Hans Ringered, I told you, and I've graduated from University in Oslo in '82. So you can see I'm an old man in size and shape. And I left the university in '85 and started in business. And I've been a chief executing officer for more than 30 years in private enterprises in Norway. So just by chance, I returned to university. And I haven't heard about these narratives, and I met Helen. And she gave me some of these portraits. And I was astonished of how fair they was treated, how respectful the description was made, and how authentic it felt to read it. So that was our first meeting point, and that's enough for this time.
Yeah.
I'll return later.
Thank you. So it's a, you can read and see what you feel about it, but the point is that I think, of course, I have an agenda wanting to find out how their perception is. And also it has to be, so is it scientific or not? I think that one of the questions that came up, what's the difference between this than biographies or novels? Because they are long stories about people's life and experience. And what makes it scientific is one of the questions that comes up, yeah? Because what is the difference there? Because so what? Somebody tells you a life story, and then this is a method that I've used that is called a life history approach. And so it is first initially a life story, and then you go back to the respondent and you ask, because they argue for something in their stories. हैन? Argue गर्छ, यो मेरो लागि चाहिँ महत्त्वपूर्ण हो भनेर argue गरेको हुन्छ. अनि गएर सोच्नुपर्छ के, and then you understand there is an argument, you build up an argument, हैन? And so that's why it took a long time also, because you have to go back. मैले पढेँ, मैले यसरी बुझेँ. तपाईले भन्नुभएको कुरा यो हो, किन तपाईलाई यो एकदम यो महत्त्वपूर्ण भएको लाग्नु भयो हैन तपाईलाई. So I would go back and ask, why are you so, for example, arguing for this more Hindu guru way of understanding teaching? किन चाहिँ तपाईलाई चाहिँ यो, why is it important? And so the next round I would ask that question, and then I would also add that to the stories and and so you kind of build it over some time, and you give it some time, and then when the story has been told and you've gone back and made sure this is what I'm arguing for, this is important, then you look at the stories and you add, like that's how I was also introduced to Pramod's work, by reading articles of other people who are involved in education, or what they are referencing to. It might be historical documentaries, it might be other things that are going on in the context, and then you add to show what kind of a context and why they would argue in that sense. So it would be maybe reference to Hindu beliefs, it could be reference to politics, or it could be references to the historical context of what they are saying. Now that's a life history, then it becomes a life history. So that's how you build up the data. So that has been basically what I've had as a foundation for my work. And these stories then, so of course there are themes that emerge from the data. And these themes, I have now put them in different like categories, or like some of them are very much arguing for more of the Gurukul values and why it's important to understand education from that kind of a perspective. Others were more in favor of the Maoist understanding, and some of them were arguing for the Maoist understanding. And others were maybe more influenced by Western ideas of child-friendly, child-centered approaches, and they were involved in that kind of teaching, and they would maybe also argue for why. And this is important to me. And one was involved in more appreciative inquiry ideas that he was working on. And so then from that foundation, you start thinking, how can I understand this? What kind of a perspective way? Because they're all, there's always a variation. There will be a variation of responses. Some were more conservative, others were more, more resisting new reform ideas, and others were more, appreciating or accepting. So there was these kind of things that come up that you are analyzing. And so that's kind of the short background of how the study is built up. And so for a while I was also struggling with what kind of theoretical perspective I should put on to the data. And like we do in an academic kind of way, we kind of have a methodology about, how we would work on how we found the data, how we approached it and argue for that, and then we have a theoretical part, and I was also looking at these, I had initially said that I was looking for their belief system, and what I found in the data was that a lot of like we all do, sometimes we argue for something that we believe in, but then sometimes there is something that maybe in a difficult situation, or there are some kind of situations where you do the opposite, where you might be saying, I am very interested in child-centered, appreciative inquiry type of approaches to teaching, and then they would say, but there was one situation where I had to beat the child. They didn't do their homework. Due to from appreciative inquiry, that's a totally different way of understanding education. And you think there is a त्यहाँ चाहिँ मिलेन नि हैन पहिला यो argue गर्छ फेरि अर्को argument आउँछ नि. So there is a kind of a dissonance in what you see coming up from the data. And so then I had to think of how can I understand this? What does it mean that you argue for something, but then the only way that I could have maybe detected these conflicting kura that we all, I'm sure, recognize from our own lives. There's always that conflicting thing in it, because in the environment and in the context that we are living, it's not always we are able to do what we would like to do, and what and so I had to
pointer.
Okay. So what I had to do was, I think I needed to nuance these concepts of beliefs, ideals, and agency, which is in a way all connected, but tries to understand how this dissonance comes up in the data. So, like you have ideals that are more, oriented towards your own value system, how you're socialized, what kind of a context you are in. I know you are living in a Nepali context, in a Hindu environment maybe, or from a historical context. And then you are, of course, things are changing. You are impacted by new ideas, and then you argue for a way of handling these things. So that's how I was having to nuance this belief concept in my thesis, because what I was looking for was, of course, people's values and perspectives on life, and particularly on education. And to be able to do that, I find that, of course, we can understand things through questionnaires, observations, also interviews, we can go out. But I find this narrative approach, where you open for people to express their experiences or understanding, would, if you are looking to find value systems or people's perspectives, this narrative approach seemed to be a way to grasp or get hold of that. So this is what this slide is trying to show in a more how you would view this kind of a method.
I think it's important to emphasize exactly the point of values, because when it comes to changing people's mindset or understanding of education, well, traditionally programs tries to get implications on beliefs, the belief level, and maybe also the agency, but seems to forget in somehow the most important part, the basic values. That's really is
from the foundation of what you're arguing from. I know.
Yeah.
So, and it's quite difficult to get that, to get hold of that. In particular, I think as researchers, we often interfere with the data by starting to ask questions or guide the person. And I think this is a very challenging thing in narrative approaches, where you are trying to get someone to express themselves freely and to get hold and not interfere by asking guiding questions, or it's very quite challenging to do that, to not interfere. Okay, so another thing that this example of my research has shown is also I was trying to apply theories, like what kind of a viewpoint shall I look at this data then from, now that I have have these long interviews or narratives. And I was struggling to find some kind of theory. Maybe you usually would try to find Bourdieu or Bernstein or some kind of to understand the data. And I was for a while struggling. I was thinking, okay, there are a lot of changes in Nepal. There are attempts to for democracy and those kind of things. And I was trying to apply Karl Popper's idea from his works on, after war in Europe, how some ideologies that are attempting to open up for more democracy appear to do that, but have a closing effect on those things. Well, I did that for a while, and that's how Hans came into the picture, because I couldn't make it work. Here I am trying to look at something in a totally different context. It's not from a Western basis. So a lot of the times, we started discussing these issues, how theories, we apply theories onto something that are actually from a different way of thinking, or have grown out of a different context.
Different context,
yeah.
And different circumstances, and different, basically, ideas.
So I think after a while, I had to give up Karl Popper, and I actually had to, if we are to be fair to the data, that was my attempt, I was thinking, I need to, what are the perspectives, or what are the contextual factors, or the perspective from which these people are speaking from. And I thought, I need to find something that is from this context to view the data. And so I think I started, rather than using, these open, closed concept of Karl Popper to look at the interviews, I had to throw it out, or it didn't work, because then they come out in the wrong way. So I started to work on concepts such as, from a more of a dukha sukha, inferior, superior, clean, unclean, testo kalko. It is more how you are talking from, from this kind of a perspective. So I thought this is better theory to, what should we call it, perspectives, from a more of a Hindu, Nepali context perspectives. And that's what I ended up doing and in the data. So I had to and I think I learned a lot from this struggle of what kind of theories can we apply to data that is about people's own understanding of life and experiences. Yes. So now I don't think that this is a full-fledged theory on something, but it is an example of trying to give the data in a way, respect the data from where it is coming from. because you can imagine if we took unclean, clean, I know, concepts like that from this part of the world onto Western teachers' perspective, it wouldn't work, I know. In Norway, if I was to say who's, what in their stories, how do they perceive clean, unclean? Dette meaning now. But sometimes we do that in this context by putting Western concepts onto our data here to understand something, which is from a different perspective, that is looking for something else. You see what I mean? So I think I was thinking that it wouldn't give meaning in a Norwegian context to look at unclean, clean, or sukha dukha. Maybe a little bit. Maybe if I was really trying to make it fit in, I could maybe. But in a way, it doesn't make sense. But here it does make sense. People are, the data did come out understandable through these kind of concepts. So let me not talk too much, but so you get an idea how we have been working. Okay, so if I was to sum up basically on what I've been doing, is that I think the basic, understanding here is how education or the pedagogical understanding is so intimately connected to one's own context and value systems, and that is maybe the most important learning. And also it brings out how people in a certain context perceives their own work, and especially now it was about education and teaching. Yes. So I think because I'm moving on a little bit, I think this is enough to understand how I've been working, and the importance of context. And that's how the two of us have been working, because after submitting the thesis, I have now been working in teacher education in Norway, and somehow these findings or understandings I have been able to also apply and understand, and has had implications on my way of teaching or understanding teacher education also in Norway. And that's how Hans comes into the picture, and that's why it would be interesting also to have his perspective, because this is a small, investigation, and it says something about something, but what does it mean in a bigger, broader sense? And that might be interesting to hear, because Hans is now working also in teacher education, but more from a vocational teacher education program. And the two of us for 2 or 3 years now have tried out teacher education based on this understanding of how life experiences, how you have perceived and understood and your knowledge is coming from your context and your history and your life. I know how that is so closely related to who you perceive yourself as a teacher. And that's how we have been working together on these issues of life experience as a part of teacher education, and importance of life experience.
Yeah, and thank you very much, Helen. And this is, well, I have to explain, because I told you I returned to university just by chance. There was just a happening. I got a telephone call. They asked me, could you perceive to return to university after all these years? We're going to start a course for vocational teacher trainers. And well, I thought, well, you got one last opportunity in life to change field of work. So as you know, I'm old. That was exactly the last one. And I said, okay, I'll try to do that. I know there will be a big change in my life, but I take the challenges. So there was a collapse in the Norwegian oil industry. There was a lot of unemployed technicals, and they wanted to keep them. They was afraid of brain drain. They would keep them staying in the area, and they would like to revitalize them in somehow. And that means making them to become vocational teachers. And when you start with a group, exactly like this, 15 people, from the age of 35 to close to 60, it's so obvious. You have to take the experience into account. You can't just start with theory or ideas. You have to ask them. They've been working with kind of pedagogy for all their lives. They brought up our own children. They have had younger employees that have been training. They've been discussing in project groups. A lot of experience. So I couldn't start with pedagogical theory and ask them to go reading books. I have to listen to them. So that's in somehow the same thing you did in Nepal. I started with listening and trying to make a long line of everybody, trying to understand what their experiences was in the field of pedagogy. And that was really a new attempt in the Norwegians' higher education or vocational trainers. So it was a kind of experiment, and well,
yeah,
we didn't know each other, but we have worked in nearly the same way, and we got connected. And then we started to try out this approach.
So from these life stories of Nepalese teachers, they have taught us, or me, has now ended up in Norway as a new innovative idea of how to do teachers training, which is interesting, isn't it? So I wasn't doing that for a while, but now, because of this understanding of how intimately connected people's lives are, how important it is to not ignore context and life experience and who I am and my value system, which I find a lot of programs seem to ignore. So, and what we are also doing now, we have tried out in various levels of teacher education, is to not just look at theory and practice, but also life experience as curriculum. So what we're doing is that we view, like everybody, like if we were in a teacher education program, we would view you as curriculum, and you as curriculum, and everyone who is here, that they come with knowledge. So it's a view of knowledge that is not something just that we find in books, but knowledge is in people, and they have knowledge, and that knowledge is important to as a pedagogical. For in a way, these what I'm talking is more anthropological, but how it becomes pedagogical is how you view teaching. That's when it becomes pedagogical. That knowledge or development or generating knowledge starts with people's own understanding, and then you build that on something that somebody already knows and understands, and fits together with their understanding. And so this is what we've been doing in teacher education now. Viewing.
We have to pinpoint so that it's not a simple way to work in Norway as well. We have a lot of struggles in our own university. It's not easy to understand this approach because it's quite different from the traditional academical approach.
Yeah. So you wouldn't, for example, start by teaching theories about something. You would rather start by understanding people's understanding of certain concepts or themes or the issues of education, and view everyone as part of the curriculum. And so it's a very participatory way of understanding education, where you would start with that, and then maybe you would connect it to theoretical approaches within that field or that theme, and see if it gives more understanding.
Yeah, that's important.
And also be able to criticize theory through this kind of approach. Is this true? Does it give me more understanding of a certain theme? But it creates an ownership to teaching, and you as a person also, not just the theory and the practice that is the normal way of looking at education, but it incorporates people's initial foundational understanding and culture, values, life experiences as a part of curriculum. Would you like to add something?
There's a lot to add, but I think it is a bit complicated because for more than 500 years now we have been believed in books and in theories, and have an idea that what is written in a book is much more worth than what you got in your head. I'm not sure about that. When it comes to vocational training, it's really important what people have experienced. and what kind of experience is possible to connect to a theory. That's the main question, not what theories should be put in your head. It's the other way around. We have to look for theory that is useful to explain what you have experienced, what you have understand, and maybe expand the understanding a bit, but not starting with the theory itself. So that is really a new approach, and we are struggling at the university in Agder because our colleagues are not used to that way of thinking. It's strange, it seems kind of unacademic, maybe. Maybe
it challenges the idea of knowledge, whose knowledge.
And the ownership to knowledge, that is really important. Who owns the knowledge? Knowledge? Is it Bourdieu or is it you? Well, if it's in your head, you own it.
Yeah.
And that's the important thing of education.
And I think from this study, that how it started to question these things also.
Exactly.
Because, you know, would you want to put on, you know, how we do that in academia? We use, theories from a totally different context to try to view something and to explain and understand. Now, it challenges that kind of an approach. And I'm sure it was a concern for my mentors what I was doing, because I had to kind of go away from that and create some kind of theory from this foundational, to understand something and to give credit to that knowledge that is already here. And I think what I've learned from that, or from my own experiences being teachers for a long time, is asking yourself, what kind of qualifications do a teacher need to,
what is the main task?
What is the main task? And I think the biggest challenges that we see now in Norway, and maybe I think also in Nepal, is this idea that methods, recipes, are going to help me teach something, and this reliance on somebody telling you how to teach. But reality, from our own experience as well, is it's more about how confident you are as a teacher, from who you are, what you believe in, and what is the best for my students. You know that within yourself. These teachers who have that confidence are often the best teachers, because they know who they are and what they are doing, and they are not relying on any kind of methods. Are just something that you can take out and use when it fits you, but you are not guided by methods. And I think the biggest threat for many of the teachers that we are also working in Norway is actually methods, because this crazy looking for methods has gone a lot, is threatening.
It's gone wild in Norway,
and it undermines teachers' confidence.
Yeah.
And as we know, teachers' confidence is the basis of, being a good teacher.
And also not only confidence, but also competence. Yeah. Because the main task for the teacher is how to conduct a lesson, how to take care of children, how to understand the circumstances, how to understand what the level the different children is on, and to adapt the lessons to the right position.
And to the right context.
Of course.
So, and one thing that maybe we should end with, the appreciation of also, of course, it's not a view that thinks that everything is, there are always negative, positive aspects of any culture and value systems. But what you can see from the data is how teachers are arguing for certain values or perspectives that are quite different from maybe the individualistic, materialistic approaches of our Western concepts of how to teach or this value system. Well, what they are arguing for are much more spiritual oriented, much more holistic, more collective. How a child needs to be fit, how they need certain, they need to have self-discipline to be part of the collective, and their duty in a collective. These values are quite complementary to Western values, and somehow it would be great if somebody could come to Norway to speak about more Hindu maybe or Nepali values that are worth holding on to, and not forgetting about, that are very much complementary to things that we in the West maybe are forgetting, the importance of the spiritual or the holistic or these values that come from a different perspective or worldviews. Thank you. I think that we should stop here and hear, because we only have maybe 15 minutes left.